For all the criticism that GNOME and libadwaita get, application styling is in a fairly good state for building a consistent environment. KDE styling, on the other hand, is a bit of a mess. If I show you Kate, Plasma, NeoChat, and Kclock, you might rightfully say, oh, these are all using the Breeze theme, specifically the Breeze Lite theme. But they're not really using the same Breeze theme. These are 4 different imitations using 4 different approaches. Kate is using Qt widgets. This is created through a C++ Qstyle API and is limited by widget availability. Also, you're styling through C++, which no designer wants to do. That is very much focused for the developers. NeoChat is using Qt Quick. This is created through QML, a much more friendly language to designers, using a desktop style to reuse that Qt widget styling, pulling in some limitations from that system. But it comes with the problem of custom styles can break applications, and KDE has no plans to do away with custom styles. Now, Kclock is also using Qt Quick, but not the same version of Breeze due to a limitation of desktop styles and mobile design. And Plasma is using SVG, with lots of styling information encoded in the code. Now, SVG rendering also comes with some performance penalties, and whilst it is fine to work with, especially for the designers, is not exactly intended for UI design, and there could be a better solution. So how do we resolve this? Well, the pictures I've been showing you on screen come from a recent talk at Academy 2024, Union, the Future Styling in KDE. Now, I would like to show you a lot of the footage of the talk, and there is a recording, okay? This is 720p. This is not at, like, running at 144p. This is what they streamed. I know it looks like a bad VHS recording from the 1990s, but I promise you it's from a few days ago. If someone at KDE needs help, please let me know. I can provide video capture equipment. Now, whilst the 4 I listed out are the main ways of doing styling, technically you could argue there is also a 5th, that being the Breeze implementation for GTK. But that's a whole nother can of worms that may or may not be addressed by this solution. But clearly there is a problem here. There are 4 different ways of styling applications in what looks like the same way, right? Like, if it was 4 completely different styles, who cares? Yeah, obviously they're going to be different. But they're clearly all trying to be Breeze. And the way this situation happened is pretty simple. XKCD 927. Situation, there are 14 competing standards. 14? Ridiculous. We need to develop one universal standard that covers everyone's use cases. Yeah. Soon, situation, there are 15 competing standards. What we need to have happen is this. The XKCD has the good ending. There is one standard, and that is what Union is trying to do. For this solution to work, it has some very important requirements. Firstly, and probably the most important, it needs to be the single source of truth for KDE styling. This is something designers really, really want because the current situation is an absolute nightmare. I've seen people say, why doesn't Breeze get more modernized? Why doesn't this get updated? Why doesn't that get updated? How is it that Breeze still looks basically the exact same as it did in Plasma 5? And designers want to change it. The problem is because of the situation it's currently in, it is a nightmare to change it. Any little change needs to be changed across 4 different standards, 5 if you're including the GTK one as well, and this is just really difficult. Also, just as important, it should be easy to change for both developers and designers alike. Designers shouldn't be blocked because there just isn't enough developers to update the overly complicated solution. And when working with this solution, it should not require extensive developer knowledge, like, for example, having to do all of your styling in C++. For some technical requirements, it should optimize for the target. So if it's targeting Qt Quick, it should make use of Qt Quick hardware acceleration. It shouldn't try to come up with its own weird, magical, another standard solution. It should use what is already there. It should not contain application logic. This is going to make it considerably easier to re-render things as they are needed to be re-rendered. Also, it should be flexible enough to define custom types. This allows for restyling existing components like those in Kirigami, for example. Now, the core idea is quite simple. One might say, too simple. Don't worry, there's a bit more explanation than just a bunch of colored boxes. And if you've ever worked with a JVM language before, the structure might sound quite similar. So the input layer defines how things should look. So whether that be in CSS, SVG, C++, for whatever reason, it defines the application look. Then the intermediate layer, rather than just being the input, is a lightweight generic format that contains the information of the input in a way that is easy to convert to various other formats. And then the output layer, rather than being directly tied to the input like it would be in the current situation, takes that intermediate layer and then converts it into whatever is needed in that specific context. So whether that be Qt widgets, Qt quick, so on and so forth. And this is why I made the JVM comparison. This comes with some very nice benefits. Let's say you want to go and change the input format. So you start with CSS and you want to support SVG or QML or anything else. Assuming it is generating the same intermediate format, nothing changes in the output. You can support anything you want on the input, and as long as that middle is generating what it should be, output is fine. And the same is true on the other side as well. If you want to go and add a completely new output format, nothing has to change on the input side. Putting this in terms of the JVM pipeline, you started with Java. This Java is converted into bytecode, and that bytecode is converted into the assembly for whatever system you're running that code on. But then at some point, Kotlin came along, and Kotlin is an entirely different language to Java, but it's generating that same intermediate bytecode, so nothing on the output side has to change. Okay, but what about the real-world KDE case? So there is currently a proof of concept, where it takes CSS as the input, it converts it into a very minimal intermediate layer, and then implements currently very simple stuff, just buttons in Qt quick and Qt widgets. And whilst there is a slight difference, that's because the developer just didn't feel like fixing it, the concept works. At least at this very simple level. But finding the right input format is very much still an open question. Whilst the author does certainly want to use CSS, the problem is there isn't really a good CSS parser that exists outside of the browser. And the ones that do kind of just take in the CSS and just expect you to be working with an HTML document because, for the most part, that's what you're doing with CSS. So it probably would require some sort of custom implementation, which is going to be a lot of work for that. Also, it would require reworking quite a bit of the KDE styling system to have this actually sit in place of doing the styling. And there is some work that needs to be done to split up this system in a way that it can actually be tested as it goes. Because yes, you could just go and implement the entirety of Union and just be like, hey guys, Union. But if maybe there are real world issues, if maybe it doesn't land, if maybe some developers are against it, you can't exactly just drop it all at once. Now, to take this further, David Edmondson suggested starting with Plasma styling. This has a known input and a known output format. This lets you focus just on the intermediary. And in a system like this, the intermediary is by far the most important. It's easy to get CSS correct. It's easy to get Qt widgets and Qt styling correct. But to have a system that sits in the middle, that can take you from any input to any output, you need to make sure you have the correct information in that format, otherwise the entire system is going to suck. There's no point building a system like this if it completely limits what designers can do. There is no point building a system like this if the input does not match the output. There is no point building a system like this if it is worse than what currently exists. So that is exactly what he did, and in its current form, it looks identical, and that is the goal, right? It's very far from complete. Right now, it's just handling some buttons, okay? and SVG is not the intended final input, and currently there is a lot of magic needed to have app integration. The infrastructure just isn't there, along with a ton of other open questions that need to be resolved. Like, maybe this could also be used for theming GTK apps like their KDE apps. Obviously, there's a lot of hesitancy there with the stop theme my app stuff, but assuming that stuff wasn't there, there's no reason why that couldn't be done. It just needs a very different style of output. This has been a thought experiment from the author since 2022, so maybe it still won't go anywhere. Maybe this isn't going to be anything besides just a talk at Academy that tries to fix something but just doesn't really get much reception. But if it does go anywhere, I'll certainly be keeping my eye on it. But what do you think? Do you think this is going to be an actual solution, or do you think it's just going to become this? Because there is a high possibility that it just becomes this. And that's sad. But let me know your thoughts down below. If you liked the video, go like the video. And if you really liked the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, Scribes, Libera Pay linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and we need to unify the breeze. That sounded funnier in my head.